Hello and welcome to day 37 of 365 Days to Racial Change. My name is Tomlins Nyback. Welcome again. We are going to jump right into it after we get some of our little advertisements and resources out of the way. We're informed by Dr. Claude Anderson, and great guy. I'm going to do a piece on some of his biography real soon, but I've read 3 of his works, and they all are very relevant and pertain to the black life in America, white entitlement, power, things like that. Some of the old arguments that prevail, and they will prevail until we take a good look at some resolutions, reparations, things like that. A Black History Reader is one of the first books I read. We're going to be referencing that work today. I encourage you to get these books. Also, Black Labor, White Wealth, some information we'll get out of there. And today's subjects want to reference actually both those books. And PowerNomics, Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America. Also, we're going to have story time. We had story time yesterday with Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Very good work. And we are going to, what we're doing is using that fictional work to illustrate some aspects of white entitled life, black slavery, and that vulnerability and things like that. Also behind me, you got hashtag us2, hashtag USTOO, and that's so you'll find more of the community of black issues doing black stuff. Also, there's another site called blackenough.com. You can also go to PowerNomics.com or .org and the Heritage Institute to find more of Dr. Anderson's work specifically. Let's see. So we're going to jump right into it. We went over some aspects of vertical integration a few days ago. Did 2 days of that. We're going to, of course, revisit a lot of this stuff. Got a whole year to look at this stuff. But with vertical integration, it was more just the economic model and things like that, how corporations, how business, control from raw materials to processing, marketing, distribution, things like that, and this constant cycle, but a concerted effort that keeps everything aligned, and it's usually done around specific people groups and languages and things. So, with vertical integration, we also have to talk about something called ethno-aggregation, which is the subject today. They go hand in hand. They don't have to, but they do. It'd be like if I had a corporation with Mexicans, Hispanics, Italians, Japanese, whites, and Native Americans, and we controlled the aspects of some product or service from raw materials to processing, marketing, and distribution. That wouldn't necessarily be ethno-aggregation unless we were just all Americans. But we're talking about certain people groups now. The Asians do it very specifically and focused. Hispanics do it. Okay, people groups, Arabs, have that aspect of their economic life. They're very closely tied together, vertical integration and ethno-aggregation. But we'll try to separate ethno-aggregation today. It comes about, this more so ethno-aggregation, or the lack of it, can be seen more with black folks than the lack of vertical integration. Vertical integration, that we're talking about economics and business, it appears that blacks are very much in tune and in the economic life and moving around and making money and holding jobs to a degree and things like that. Ethno-aggregation probably is more pronounced because the lack of overall unity within the black community. We're, as a group, we're very scattered and isolated. Once we kind of climb the economic ladder, we'll have our cohort, but we will kind of cast off our aspects of our blackness, if you will, and be like shining. I don't want to use the word token, but just be a minority surrounded, by white culture. Now that we're safe now, making a lot of money. We keep making money because we are entertaining or laughing and things like that. A good example is one of my adult cartoons there, Family Guy, in Cleveland. He's the one black guy hanging out with the white folks. I'm kind of in that same boat myself. So that's the lack of ethno-aggregation. Let's see how Dr. Anderson defines ethno-aggregation. This is in your notes as well. He says it's a voluntary concentration of individuals' resources and votes around a population's common need to improve their economic and political competitiveness. I like the first few words there. He says voluntary, right? It's not necessarily like the slave culture where you're just taken, sold, and put with whoever. It doesn't matter what you feel or what your desires are, goals. They just put you in. But ethno-aggregation would be the voluntary coming together, which would be better. You don't want to be this oppressive, compulsive force in the lives of black people, because that would just defeat the whole purpose. But if blacks would come together around their common issues and stay together, keep some unity, then they'd be able to make some political changes, to have a voice, to speak more. Today is a day after the president spoke, and he had a lot of black. He had a lot of black achievement out there with incarceration reform, prison reform, and things like that. A lot of good stories and good people he had, but they were black, and I found that interesting. Right, that he found no white examples to lift up. There's probably some things to that, and it's politics, so it's suspect to begin with in that context. So we talk about the lack of ethno-aggregation for blacks. We see it very profoundly, of course, in whites. I guess it goes without saying. There's just a lot of them, so it's hard for them not to be together in a space. But the Asians practice it. You see it in their the way they have their bodegas and their laundromats and things like that. They're populated by Asians, and not just because of the economic twist on it, but the Asians congregate with Asians. You see the Hispanics. As soon as the weather breaks, we're in kind of a winter season. now, but when the weather breaks and stays warm, you'll see the Hispanics every Sunday, large groups out in the parks. I'm sure part of that's a religious gathering. There's a lot of Spanish church around, but it's also their people, their language, they're coming together. That's ethno-aggregation. You see it also with Arabs in Detroit, I'm sure, as Dr. Anderson points out. So that's the group successfully practicing it, and they get, because they practice it so well, then they can come together and they do have more vertical integration. Now, they might not have control all aspects of a product or service. That'd be pretty tough to get raw materials, and you got to start somewhere. I think about, for blacks to have successful ethno-aggregation, to turn that into vertical integration, we'd have to start somewhere with a product or service, and then slowly get in to other areas of the supply chain to make that work. But initially we would, and we do, I think, to a degree. Look at any black business, the supply chain probably begins with whites supplying the raw materials and things like that. And a successful black business would probably have a lot of white patronage there at the top of that economic chain, but hopefully they're in the middle. If it's a black business is sensitive, they're going more for affirmative action for blacks as far as vertical integration, and from that, then we can grow and use black resources at the front end for raw materials, and the back end, those the final product and distribution, and making some sales with that product or service. But anyway, we'd have to start somewhere, and it would be stronger. It'd be more if it was a deliberate result of ethno-aggregation, that coming together to improve our competitiveness politically and economically. Very, very important, and it's so. See, I don't see black unity in general happening. It's not on the television. I don't see it out in the world. Very cordial, but there's no empowerment that makes it known that there's a deliberate movement happening. Right now, women and white women are really, they've got a lot of that political momentum in the country. Last night, the women on Ms. Pelosi's side, or support, all wore white and came wearing white there during the president's speech. But we don't see the blacks like maybe back in the 60s or something like that, where there was a way to dress, a way to talk, and things like that. I just don't see that anymore. And I feel like blacks have a sense that we've arrived at whatever we were after from the 60s march, from the assassination of Dr. King and things like that. When I don't see it, Dr. Anderson does not see it, and he even points out that this phenomena that happened back in the 60s with civil rights and social integration were phenomena that just further dispersed blacks. Now, blacks at least were in this space segregated, that was actually a good thing. Now looking back in hindsight, 2020, you know, what blacks wanted, of course, was freedoms, and they wanted the same entitlements, and we wanted the same access to wealth and resources that everybody else had. But they, um, instead of having that access as a group, we instead disbanded our sports teams and bus lines and businesses and things like that, and dispersed ourselves into the white culture. And there, our power just got diminished. It really crushed and decimated. So we're to the point where, like, now that we're not unified, it's when things happen to us, we're alone, and it's hard to organize resources because we're so spread out now, and our numbers have diminished, and things like that. So to ethno-aggregate would be the beginning of bringing that together. Now, I'm not saying it's not happening. Dr. Watkins with the Black Business School. Oh, and other resources here, hashtag us too, and you can find groups happening. But the getting that traction is slow right now. Um, I do believe we're heading in that direction, though. You know, it's just we're just not as focused just yet. You know, and I say this because I know as far as the few subscribers that come here to 365 Days of Racial Change, we've never talked about it. It was not brought up with this sense or need to come together for Black unity and things like that. Oh, there was a lot of Afrocentric events growing up and talk and stuff like that. And we had roots come through um, on the television screen way back then, but it's not. It wasn't a sustained Black effort in my life. All right. So the 60s was a cause. It caused Black individualism, and we went kind of like a diaspora. um, think about the Christian times where there's Christ did his thing and the church was forming and different wars and events and rulers, leaders dispersed the people, the organization, that religious organization. And the same thing happens to Blacks here in America. And, finish up with, like, the problem is, see, the white folks, they keep, things break down along behavior line and phenomena at, like, what's happening. Okay, so we had Dr. King saying civil rights, social integration, but then we had Malcolm X, Black Panthers, other groups like that wanting to collectively come together, Blacks to come together, unite, and exercise power from that base. And so whites scratched their heads. Well, Dr. King wants this, integration. Other groups want separation. What do Blacks want? And what the answer is, we don't really want any of the extremes. We're forced into this this situation through the impact of slavery and stuff like that. Those two extremes exist. What blacks want, we just want to be free, have same access to wealth and resources that all the other groups have and exercise. What we do need to do as blacks, we need to come together as a group and be unified as the other groups. That's one thing all the other groups have, that exercise the access to wealth and resources, is that unity. But then we want to be unimpeded when we reach out for that. We were prevented from owning land out west. We're prevented from the gold rush and precious metals and resources in the ground. We're prevented. We were always used as the labor to extract those resources, but you whites didn't give us and give us, and that's the appropriate thing, because you had the guns, the power, you kept the legislation slightly ahead of the curve as blacks gained more freedoms and things like that. There were a lot of really underhanded things put in place to keep blacks suppressed. Jim Crow's, black codes, semi-slavery, and then forget about the terror and the lynchings and the sacking of some cities and communities that were thriving and growing. So we want you to get out of the way and allow us to participate without the color of our skin being an issue. Got a long way to go. I put a quote, a guy named James Boyce. He says, accepting a person on the solely on the basis of their skin color is just as racist as rejecting a person based on their skin color. And that's very true. So, keep that in mind. It's pretty dicey. Blacks want to be, we don't want our color to be an issue, but because our color is an issue, we need to address that issue, if you know what I mean. So that's ethno-aggregation. Come together, black folks. I know we have no holiday, I guess, that we practice consistently together. There's no, we've got our Kwanzaa and our Juneteenth out there, but none of those holidays or observations have reached me consistently year after year. I hear the names and things like that, but it doesn't ring true. Like some of these things, like Kwanzaa, it's kind of contrived, right? It's not like 4th of July, an event, celebrating an event, but making up a kind of Christmas celebration, I don't know. I'm just not feeling that. It's not taken off as well as I think it's intended, or maybe it's growing. I just haven't heard about it in the past couple of years. But we need to come rally around an event and things, but we don't. We're too spread out, isolated in our just where we're at. The people high up are entertainers that are really making it, that have made it. They're into supporting gays and women and handicap and things like that. All the other groups that come and bleed off black power and um, and recognition, by being associated with all these other groups, which are valid groups and all that. I'm not saying they're not valid and they don't need support. What I am saying, and Dr. Anderson goes at length consistently about how these groups come along and piggyback on the work of blacks, when it's not the same argument. Blacks are arguing first, well, we need reparations that we've not gotten, things like that, and 400 years of slavery, oppression, and abuse. No other group really corners the market in America like that. Native Americans come close. They had their land stolen. We had our freedom stolen. I don't know. There's some comparisons that Native American was killed off, really decimated, rolled way back to the Stone Age. But at least they get recognition, they get money, they got land parcels out. There were very tangible gestures made to the Native American that weren't made to the abused black slave in America. So that's another subject, but try to get your head at least around ethno-aggregation. It's very important. It's going to be an important element to have for blacks in America, American blacks specifically, to realize some sense of freedom, some sense of not being taken for granted in America. Long way to go for that. I'm Tom Nyback. That's day 37, 365 days to racial change. We're moving along. Please join me tomorrow. Bye-bye.